right now we've got some very serious issues, whether it's health or healthcare, rebuilding our country with roads. We're losing a lot of people in the medical service because of burnout. So we've got some very serious situations, and I don't have time, what I call creeping up on the Kardashians.
Right.
The vapid behavior, me, and me too. It's stupid, it's obtuse, and it doesn't offer anybody anything.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and this is a podcast in conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which is live on Facebook. And then goes out wherever podcasts go out. You can find it in all the usual places. And today I'm talking to Dave Pelzer, who is a very well-known author, had a whole number of books on the New York Times bestseller list, I think for some record amount of time. And today we're talking about his new book, Return to the River. And Dave, just first to situate yourself, I'm sitting in Massachusetts, just north of Boston, and I'm presuming you're in what is your relatively new place that I read about in the book in California. Am I right, or are you somewhere else right now?
No. So I'm ensconced in the Lower Russian River Basin. God is, I think God has a weird sense of humor since Mr. Williams passed away, because it's either fires or floods or mudslides. It's the apocalypse. I just wish that Bruce Willis can die hard for us, or Daniel Craig or Tommy Cruise, because it's always something in California.
I know, you're actually very near where I've got a bunch of family living, starting in the Bay Area where my wife grew up, and then up into the Sonoma area. And when I was looking and saw Russian River and everything else, I said, oh, these are all places I've been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good part of the world if you're not swept away by floods or fire.
And it's amazing in life that you meet people that are just across the street from you, in a sense, or they know someone who knows someone that that you kind of grew up with. It's a nice feeling.
Yeah, we probably have about 1 degree of separation here. For one thing, we share some of the editors down at HCI Press. I was looking at your acknowledgments, and I knew everybody in there because I'd been dealing with them a couple of years ago on a book they did with me. So, interesting how our paths have crossed. I want to, first of all, just hold the book up and tell everybody that I read it, and I've got a lot of thumbed pages here with underlinings that I want to talk to you about. But before I get into that, I haven't heard any interviews with you recently, but I would like to take this one in a slightly different direction for an author interview. In reading your book and in knowing that you are, what are you now, 61 or 62? Because you were 60 in the book.
I'm a surprise 62, Frank.
Yeah, because I was trying to think, well, gee, he's got COVID in the book, so he wrote it recently, but I was figuring you said you were 60 in the book.
Yeah.
And now I'm figuring 62. But here's how I want to get into this. Your works are very biographical and memoir style works. And so people who know of your story of surviving abuse and so forth and so on have heard that story, and some of it is in this book. But I want to launch this in a different direction for a moment. And that is, it seems to me that, I'm 70. I turned 70 last year. So I'm a little ahead on the path of you, and you're looking ahead no matter what at less than you have behind you. And so if you're like me, and I think you are, having just read your book, you're kind of considering your life, the impact it's had or hasn't had, the people you've known, but you're also thinking about the advice you'd pass on to other people. And I'm you have a grandchild, I have grandchildren, I do childcare for my youngest grandchildren who live nearby. We're involved in that stage of life as you are. I want to talk about the state of the world with you, because I know you've learned a lot along the way, and by default are wise because you've survived to this point. And between your Air Force experience, and by the way, my son was a Marine who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, so we have a connection in that I'm a military parent who has suffered, the suffering of the damned with someone I loved off being shot at. So I have a little bit of connection, having never served myself. You're living in a part of the world I know something about, Russian River and all the rest of that area that I love and have family in. But I want to talk to you about how you see things in the world today. Morally, politically, spiritually, what's going on out there. when you read the news, you have a point of view. I want to know where that is, and I don't know where to start exactly. So let's just start with one thing, for instance, and that is the state of young men in this country who there's a lot of writing and research about these days in terms of somewhat being ignored, in the sense that the emphasis has been on the abuse of women and so forth and so on. Yet you have a story that is horrific in terms of surviving abuse as a male from a mother, and not your father, who you had a different relationship with. We're living in a time when everybody is talking about trying to reconfigure our society in a new way. Our politics is very divided. And it seems to me that you, crisscrossing the world and talking to all these people, have met all sorts of people. What do you think the state of the U.S. is? If you gave a State of the Union speech, what would it be right now?
Well, first, if I was ever allowed that opportunity, one, you always want to be optimistic in a sense, not so doom and gloom, but you want to be as truthful and careful as much as possible, particularly in this political age. I think there was I studied politics and psychology quite a bit. Very fascinated with like the Harry Trumans or Eisenhower and so forth. And I think there was a drastic shift with Mr. Clinton, President Clinton's, because he was the first president not to serve in the military, and that used to be a standard bearer per se.
Yeah.
I think with Mr. Trump, we went from politician with decades of experience and knows the ins and outs of the House and of the Senate. So we went from a politician to a business person / game show host / every day with Mr. Trump, I was worried, are we at war with somebody today? Who did we mess up with today? Or I could not imagine, I've read just about every book written by folks who served with former Trump. And for them, it was just such a crisis within a crisis within the crisis that was just, to me, unnecessary. I remember I was with candidate Schwarzenegger many years ago when he was running for office. And, you kind of hang out with these folks. And at the end of the day, you get the hug photo, like, okay, this is great. And I said something that was pure of heart. And when I said it, everybody gasped, but I meant what I said. I put my arm around them. I said, thank you for your time, sir. But remember, if elected, now you work for us.
Yeah.
So when you look at the era of Kennedy or Truman or Reagan or Bush Sr., or, there was always a sense of service. As a fire captain, I'm responsible for my team so we can do things that are, they look dramatic. They seem impossible, but you're trained in that effort. Or like, doing a firefight in Afghanistan or Iraq. So I've seen a lot of division and violence, within that religion. A lot of people are scared. And then you add into a fact, the war of the world's pandemic from COVID. People scared. And we're going to see, and you're smarter than me on this one, for the next 10, 20 years minimum, anybody under the age of 20, the psychological damage. And that's why I think too, people get scared and do stupid things, or they're on that precipice in a sense. And then they just go one step further. And then, that atones to needless violence. And then even before Trump or before COVID, you had massive school shootings. You had a lot of violence and so forth. Now we have flash mobs, 300 or 400 people that connect on the social media. And we're going to rob Union Square in San Francisco at 8 o'clock. Be there, get some stuff.
Yeah.
So there is a breakdown with that. At the same time, too, the new challenge, I think, that's going to be political, of course, is going to be AI.
Yeah.
I mean, the cell phone, computer cell phones and so forth, that was a big thing. And now we're looking at something else. I do hope and pray that, we always want to go back at our age, nostalgia. Oh, Miss Kennedy, what can you do? Don't ask what we can do for you, ask what you can do for us. We breathe the same air. We're all mortal. We all love our children. Like that inspired us to take a step forward. And I think we're still reeling from the division of Trump's administration. And unfortunately, whether you like him or not, it's like this guy's going to be around for a while, and it's sad because it sucks all the oxygen out.
Yeah.
We get discussing, I really believe right now we've got some very serious issues, whether it's health or healthcare, rebuilding our country with roads. We're losing a lot of people in the medical service because of burnout. So we've got some very serious situations, and I don't have time, what I call creeping up on the Kardashians.
Right.
The rapid behavior, me, and me too. It's stupid, it's obtuse, and it doesn't offer anybody anything. I mean, what I try to do, and I'm sure you do the same thing, whether it's a podcast show or a book, is hopefully use your story to inspire people to better themselves and help people along the path.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about the Return to the River. There were just so many threads that interconnected
Yes.
about family and family dynamics, and hopefully that inspiration of hope.
Yeah.
So it is an unusual time politically. Some people are just getting the basic news and just going their way and doing their thing. So it'll be interesting here in the next couple of years to see what happens if Trump is indicted, if he still wants to run for office, or if he's losing. And I do believe he's losing some of his political base. I truly, truly do, because people are just tired of being tired. I don't mind working hard and have bodily fluids all over me. But when I come home, per se, psychologically, I want to be settled. I want to feel safe. I don't want to be bombarded with needless white noise. So it is an era of massive change. And I think a lot of people are very careful. And I think a lot of people who really want to serve in public office are probably, I better think about the idea of thinking about this again. Because no matter what you say or do, you're going to upset people. It's like being a parent. You want to be their BFF. You're supposed to be, our job as parents, the first 8 years to protect our babes. The next 10 years, we're Nazis. Seriously, we're Nazis. We're not here to be your BFF and let's party with the kiddies. No. You teach them right and wrong. You give them a skill set, and you want to give them on a mission. You want to put them on a path. And right now, politically, it's kind of stagnant in a sense. But
yeah, I agree with that. I want to ask you about something. I was looking, I've got a number of quotes marked in the book that I wanted to talk to you about. And one that I zeroed in on, I came from an evangelical family. My dad was a pastor and became very well known in those circles and so forth and so on. There's a whole story there. So every time I see the word God in your book, I kind of circle it, wanting to dig in a little deeper. When you write, even with all the escalating craziness, speaking of what we've just been talking about, that I can only imagine becoming worse, I feel God has granted me yet another opportunity, a final blessing with his will, if I get lucky, clean myself off, step up and out of my pit of despair. I just may have enough summers left to leave a physical legacy for Stephen, his wife, and more importantly, my grandson. You kind of sum up in there a lot of subject matter that I write and think about and talk about and interview people on this podcast about, in terms of who are we really? And when you get down to it, someone says to me, what do you do? And I know what they mean. And they want me to answer, I'm a writer and I do this and that. But of course, what I actually do is I have grandchildren and I help care for them, and everything else is sort of a footnote in terms of real priorities. You mentioned God a couple of times in your book, and, you're blessedly unspecific. It's not doctrinal. And I'm just curious, this is not a loaded question. Where does that come from? Because in your story, and I'm not being facetious, you were very far from any kind of what you would call a religious upbringing. And yet in some of your story, you're, as a child locked in the basement, you're praying. What's that thread? Because your persecutor didn't teach you to pray, I don't think. And if she did, then it's quite perverse. I don't think that was your dad. Can we just zero in on that for a minute? Because there's a spiritual thread. There's an undertone there, and I'd like to know where it comes from.
Well, throughout the book, there's always a reference, a spiritual reference.
Sure.
And I try to be very careful about how much I apply my beliefs and so forth.
Yeah.
I do remember as a very young child, like praying at dinner. You said your nightly prayers and so forth. I remember on my father's side, my aunt took us to church every once in a while and so forth. And as a very young child, I did believe in a higher power and a purpose. And if you remember, and specifically a child called It, I remember there was a scene, it was in the morning, and there was a rainbow prism that came in the bedroom. And I actually thought, oh my goodness, that's where God lives. And I would pray to the rainbow, be a good boy, stay out of trouble, try to make her happy.
Yeah.
You know, seeing that approval in a sense. So it's all, to me, my life has always been these little Reese's pieces, right time, right place, things connected, or what I call the spiritual tumbler effect. I am fairly spiritual. I want to be of service. I want to be a good person to pay forward. And I do believe that there's certain things happen, and it's not maybe not what we want when we want it, but hopefully we can learn from it.
Yeah.
And do something positive with it. And I always end my podcast show with a Baptist prayer, even though I'm Catholic. I love that prayer that says, do as much as you can, for as long as you can, for as many as you can. And I think that's beautiful. I've studied different religions, and I've talked to different people about their faith. And to me, it's just, I'm what I call a psychological voyeur. I study people who are brilliant comedians, filmmakers, politicians, people who are absolute evil. And I'm always looking for the trigger. What was that one step that you took, went too far, or didn't go far enough? And, you know, I use that to examine my mother's and I's relationship. Or I turned to the river, we brought in the character, the Darth Maul character. Everybody called my mother Darth Vader. Well, this is her master, my grandmother, in a sense. And her lack.
Yeah, the grandmother hovering over the whole thing. But, you know, just to stay with that subject in terms of the theology, if you like, for a minute, I noticed at the end, at the end of the book, one of the last things I read in it was a kind of an afterword. I forget what this is called, but it's perspectives is what you call it. And one of these people is a pastor, a priest. I'm just trying to find out which one.
Mr. Powers, one of my firefighters.
Yeah, okay. But is he a priest? Is he a Roman Catholic? Is he your priest?
No. No.
I didn't get that. So I just wondered what the connection was.
He was it was in the Navy for about 35 years, and he was a chaplain in the Navy.
Okay.
He got 2 separate PhDs in counseling and marriage and therapist. And it was interesting to work with Mr. Powers as a new firefighter, because he was older than me, but I was his fire captain instructor. And yet some of the calls that we used to run together, and it's not like these Hollywood movies, Backdraft or
right.
46, whatever. It's very quiet. There's a dance step involved, and sometimes things do not well. And yet you can tell with the crew you're working with if you want to debrief now or later, or give them space or hug or something. And when I remember showing up many hundreds of times, and Mr. Powers would not be on the call, but he would be working security. And I would always do something affable, like a super salute, or walk over and crack a stupid joke and a hug and so forth.
Yeah.
And during my situation, that unexpected divorce, and you read it in the book.
Yeah, from Kay, if I remember her name right.
Yes,
Kay.
beautiful. The Miss Atomic Blonde, we call it.
Yeah, Miss Atomic Blonde. Yeah,
I love that. The Killers are going, we love that song. But I just remember I wasn't doing too well. And then all at once, I had people that were praying for me, or thinking of me, or just, you know, putting me in their hearts. And that really elevated me, because it was pretty dark there for a while.
Yeah. And my interest in him, he was writing about working with you, and you were kind of training him. I mean, he was a chaplain in the Navy for 30 years, but then, you know, he was green when he came to be work with you in the fire department. So you had to kind of train him and help him out a little bit. And he's talking about you're taking the wheel there and getting him past a cement truck coming the wrong way with the fire truck and so forth. So you seem to have had some good memories with him and so forth. Is he still around? Is he someone you see now that you've moved, or not?
Mr. Powers and I, we talk probably once every 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And talk about our families and so forth. And you know, I was kind of even though I was a fire captain instructor, I was kind of the court gesture too.
Yeah.
And I was very big about team building and make it a family dynamic. And that's why it was very difficult for me to pull that trigger and say, oh my gosh. I mean, that's being a fire captain at age 60 is crazy. That is just insane. And then 2 separate fire districts and all that goes on between the two. One district, Sea Ranch, we had 200 calls a year. Monterey, Russian River, 1,100 calls a year.
I was going to say, if you're going to be a fire captain somewhere, if you're in my area of Massachusetts, you're not going to be out as much. You've chosen sort of literally the hot spot.
Yeah, it was
country. It's kind of crazy.
Rio, the wild, wild west.
I know.
So it's always, and I still visit them. We have like little barbecues I attend and help out and cook, or the Christmas dinners and so forth. And like any family, you know, kids move away, do different things and so forth. And it was very difficult for me to finally, and I had thought about it and prayed about, you know, because my biggest fantasy, and I'm a romantic, as you can see in the book. Yeah. I wanted to take my grandson at age 5, put him in a bunker jacket and do a mock call. There's fire there. Let's throw some water there.
Yeah.
Because my father did that with me, and it had such an impression. But I was kind of hanging on to a thin thread that was unnecessary. And, you know, I had to think about my age and what's going on in my life, health reasons, and so forth. Because you read the book, there was a small fire that we were putting out. I slipped. I fell. I had a medical situation. It's called an incident within an incident.
An incident.
That stop that process and endanger some of my crew members. And I had to think, I love this job and I love the action. And I really love being of service, Frank. I mean, there's no better thrill than to help someone out, inspire them, lift them up when they're not doing well. But I think in the end, it was a good decision. The book was totally unexpected, so that came into my lap. And I
like the way you were saying that it sort of wrote itself. You know, I've found with the number of books I've written that the ones that write themselves, sometimes you stop and you say, wait a minute, this is too easy. This should be harder work, but actually they turn out to be your best books.
And it's weird because I am not, and I admit this. I mean, I've studied Steinbeck, I've studied Stevenson. You know, even someone like a John Grisham has a certain Monet elegance in describing things. I am not a good writer. It does take me 8 to 10 hours for every single paragraph, and I'm crawling on glass.
I can understand.
What I like about it, it's almost like a Christopher Nolan film. Interstellar or Inception, because there's so many threads and they repeat themselves in the first, second, and third act, and then how they lightly connect. And you know, what you think the book is about, it's not. Again,
the other movie that's like that is Magnolia, if you remember that.
I remember that. And I remember
same kind of thing.
Yes. And how things, and I love those type of stories.
Yeah, me too.
You go into it thinking, oh my, like The Dark Knight with Christopher Nolan. I had a date and the lady says, oh my God, best action film ever. And I was shaking and sweating going, no, this is a psychological thriller. When it comes to writing, you know, I always feel like I'm crawling on glass. I'm just looking for that one verb or that one adjective. And if you look at my writings, particularly with the first, second, and now this book, it's really a film dynamic. It's very visual. It's very emotional. And to me, it's not about my character. It's about you putting yourself in that character's scope. Saying, don't do this, do this. What are you doing? Oh my gosh, I'm doing that too. So that's why I kind of said in the beginning, you know, it's a spiritual journey. It's a love story. It's a haunting love story, but it's really a story about the family dynamics of life, the work.
Speaking of which, let me just follow one thread in the book through for my own curiosity. Your son and your daughter-in-law and your grandson, I don't want you to give a name and address because we live in a weird time, but how often are you able to see them having moved? Did you get further away, or I don't know how
it's about 2.5 hours closer, because the California coast, you know, once you get on Highway 1, even though it's 60 miles away, it can take 2 to 3 hours.
Yes, and I know.
It's really nice. The big hoorah was I moved back to the Russian River. I lived here before. And I'm living basically not even 100 yards away from that Russian, or from that summer cabin that we had to visit, that I fell in love with.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, and I have it in my office here, is I have a photo of what I call 4 generations. There's a photo of myself, my father's badge in my back pocket, holding my grandson's hand, and on the other side, my son's holding his hand as we're going to visit this cabin. And I'm very happy to say that, as you know, we opened the book on my 60th birthday, and I was working in the Russian River.
Right.
This year was I forgot all about it. It was my 50th anniversary of my rescue. And I decided, oh my gosh, let's take the family to nearby Golden Gate Park. And I took my son there when he was 3.5. Now I take my grandson there when he's 3.5. And, you know, you're doing different things, but with the same type of, you know, pleasure.
Yeah, that is good. I'm going to dive back into the book for a second. I've marked so many different pages here. We've looked at the God stuff I wanted to talk about a little bit. You have a quote here from Mr. Ziegler, who basically saved you. And he's talking to you, and he says, the problem was back then, it was considered discipline, parental rights. We should have done more sooner. Seeing you when you came into my class that morning is something that haunts me to this very day. We had to do something. Our biggest fear was that if we didn't intervene, well, you wouldn't make it. And, you know, just to change the subject and get a little bit political, I guess, social commentary, maybe even on religion a little bit, the evangelical background I came from, and a number of other commentators out there today, people like Bill Maher and others in various things. You know, if you listen to some of the evangelical people that come from my background, you know, there are churches where in the church gift shop, in some fundamentalist churches, they sell spanking spoons. And it's all about, like, we should hit these kids more. And I want to be very honest with you. You know, I had a hard time reading your book because I have a hard time watching movies where something's happening to children the age I'm caring for with my grandchildren. I just, you know, I can't get through it. And all I can say is that, you know, in terms of, like, when I feel like I better take some extra blood pressure medication is when I hear someone saying that the problem with kids today is no one's been mean enough to them or tough enough on them. And I'm sure you have an opinion, and I don't want to go on this because I'm going to get too upset. But I just want to know what your response is to this whole movement out there that calls itself conservative, but God knows I don't think that's conservatism, that holds up discipline, corporal discipline, and so forth of kids, as if somehow, you know, what's missing out there is that we need to be more violent, more physically abusive, tougher with children. All my experience with my grandchildren is that, you know, sharing their life with them doesn't mean that they don't have any parameters, but obviously, you know, the place you're coming from is love, and you're trying to do, you know, as you would be done by. So I don't need to say any more. You know more about this than I do. But how does this movement right now in America of so-called conservative people, who I think often look at young people as a threat, it's like they hate the next generation. You hear, you know, they're always down on kids these days. My view is, hey, give people a chance. We haven't given them such a good world to live in. They've got plenty to complain about. I don't want to hear about that they needed to be hit more.
I think, and just off the top of my head, I'm trying to be a gentleman's gentleman here. I think it's just damn foolishness to promote such needless violence.
Yeah.
And then, and my example, just off the top of my cranial area, is you look at these active shooters, whether it's Nashville or Oakland or Chicago or Sandy Hook, and there's always a thread of either abuse or bullying, which equals murder is committed either out of lust or love or absolute white revenge. There's a scene in Return to the River, and I felt like a film director. How do I film this? How can I say one little sentence that explores or blows up the secret? There's a scene in which I'm in a psychological cage in the bottom of the basement.
Mhm.
Grandmother visits, fights with my mom, blah, blah, blah. Silence ensues. Door pops open. There it is. There it is. A non-human entity, myself.
Yeah.
Are you pleased now, mother? And my grandmother responds, that's the sorriest child I have ever seen.
I remember reading that in the book.
And then my mother just leans over, whispers to her, and that's the exact thing you said to me.
Mhm.
So it's perpetual. Hurt people, we're bullies.
Yeah.
We're bullied. And I mean, and the older you get, you always think, oh, you kids today have it so easy. Internet and Google and Amazon and blah, blah, blah. But I think in part because of COVID, in part because of instantaneous social media craziness, they have much more pressure. When I was a young person in foster care, it was danger stranger and don't drop acid. And I was always looking where I was walking, Frank. I was okay, I want to step on that acid. And now there's so many millions of tiny things every single day that these kids have to navigate through. I always say every day that we don't have COVID, every day our kids come home from school, or we can go to Applebee's once a month. That is a terrific, terrific day. So promoting violence by promoting violence is just foolhardy. And especially, just whipping kids or hitting them.
Yeah.
That is just, that's foolishness. And then what does that say to them on how they're going to raise their kids or respond to conflict? I'm a very nice guy. I'm a Robin Williams grandparent, but my grandson, when I say no, 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 that is a boundary.
Right.
And I explained to him, no, we don't run out in the middle of the street. Here's why. And even though he's only 1 or 2 at the time, we're reinforcing that boundary and that love, I think. And of course, raising kids or grandkids, there's always a teeter-totter effect, and we never quite find the balance. I think, when we know as much as the inside, as much as we promote on the outside, that's when God says, okay, guess what? You're done. You're out. Peace, but that's just foolishness.
Yeah. And it's a ridiculous. I mean, one of the recommendations of this book by Dave, Return to the River and Reflections on Life Choices During a Pandemic. And by the way, I think the subtitle might make people think that this is about that, but it isn't. It's about Dave's life, but also, a kind of a philosophy of life. But I think that, your book is an antidote to the idea that violence is somehow both justified and glamorized. It's been an interesting thing, my connection with my son, John, whose 3 kids are now living in my neighborhood that I help take care of. He was in the Marines. He did 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. At the beginning of that war, he volunteered right out of high school in 1999 and then got out in 2004 at the beginning of that interminable war. What's so interesting to me about him is how different his attitude, having been out there in combat, like yours is, having fought fires and been in the Air Force. He came back and something came up about the, owning a gun or whatever that was. And he said, look, I have been there, done that. He got expert in the Marine Corps on the rifle range. His reaction, and I'm not making a thing about guns or no guns, that's totally a different issue. His reaction was, I never want to see a gun again. And I want to get married and have children now because life is short. So what was interesting to me, thinking of these people going into schools and doing horribly violent things, or the fantasies of violence people have, or thinking about hitting kids. But here was a young man who was raised in a non-military home. His exposure to actual combat was to come back and basically, want to live a peaceful, constructive life and not deal with this anymore. He doesn't go to he doesn't go to the parties. He didn't even collect.
But
he was done. He had been there and done that. He was done.
Makes perfect sense. The biggest chefs in the world, they're either Dom DeLuise or they're anorexic, and the last thing they want to do is come home and cook or eat. I love doing comedy. I mean, I love making people laugh and telling stories, but yet I'm kind of a hermit when I'm home. I like my privacy. You know,
Yes.
again, we talked about that yin yang, that the
Yeah.
little teeter-totter effect. And what
Yeah.
your son's doing is actually healthy.
Yeah.
And it's you always have the people that somehow cling on, the cling on, the cling on. And you remember the good old days in 19,
Yeah.
you know, okay, yes, but I've moved on. And
Yeah.
like for me, it was a hard decision to leave, you know, the firefighting family, or even leave the military. But now, and you read it in the book, I have my own little library. One section has my flight suit, my son's little
Yeah.
flight suit, and I have my old bunker gear and all the.
Speaking of which, where do you keep your dad's badge?
I keep it next to my badge. I
Okay.
retired my dad's badge next to my badge, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I carried, as you said, read in the book, I carried that badge when my son was born. Every
I
Air Force,
remember.
I did tens of thousands of in-service trainings and hundreds of calls. And I just wanted to kind of carry that legacy with me.
You know, I wanted to just go to something here. I just want to make sure that I got a couple of things right here. You mentioned that we talked about the God's thread for a little bit. I'm going to come back to that. For decades, I've devoted myself to God, country, parts of the world, and everyone I've come in contact with. It seems to me that you know, that brings up a question that I want to drill down on a little bit here, and that is I don't think you were brought up within the Roman Catholic Church, were you, or was your family Catholic?
My aunt was Catholic.
The aunt you heard pray. So did you kind of wander into a Catholic church as an adult and talk to somebody? Did you have any kind of a journey that
I had
because I know how you got into the Air Force. I know who saved you. I know a lot of things from, you know, the part, but I didn't, maybe I've missed something in your writing, but I don't know what that path was. And I keep drilling down because given your background, you know, you could be someone who, you know, never wants to talk about there being a deity again because of what all happened to you. You've sort of gone in the other direction. I'm curious about it and what the actual Catholic connection is. My wife was brought up Roman Catholic, and I have obviously family in the church, but I'm very curious.
It was just a simple thing. One, you know, again, when I was a very small child, my auntie was Catholic. And when I joined the Air Force, they said, what religion are you? Okay, I guess I'm Catholic. Attended church a little bit in the Air Force. In my 40s, I attended a Catholic church and made very good friends with a gentleman named Father Lincoln. It was just, you know, it wasn't a big thing, but it was just a thread.
Yeah. And do you have any connection now in the sense that, okay, you've written these books? Well, let me back up. You've written books that have invited awards and became bestsellers and gotten you to meet presidents and all sorts of stuff. And by the way, my family experience is similar in the sense that because of my dad becoming this evangelical leader and me being his nepotistic sidekick for a while, and then having a few little successes of my own in terms of writing, you know, we've kind of trod a similar path. We've met these people and talked with folks. But it would seem to me that you would have gotten a lot of attention from mental health professionals whose world is dealing with people who have suffered in ways that you can relate to, who might come to you and ask you questions about your experience, but with a very definite goal of learning more so that they can help people better. And I'm curious about your connection with mental health professionals in the best sense of the word, or caring people, or priests, or just people who want to be friends to someone who's suffered some horrible thing in their life. That's got to be part of your story. By the way, let me just reintroduce Dave Pelzer. You're listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and we're talking about Return to the River, which I finished reading and have dog-eared all the way through with quotes I'm trying to dig into here while we have time. But Dave, talk to me about your connection with that aspect of the world out there that must have come to you at some point, talk to you, or you meet them when you're on the road speaking, or you get questions, however it's come up.
Well, I've done tens of thousands of in-service trainings for law enforcement at all levels, educators and so forth, particularly with social services and foster care. And all I try to do is just relate my story, and I break it down in psychological terms, simple psychological terms. And at the same time, trying to encourage them and praise them for the job they do, because it is kind of a thankless
Yes.
job they have in society. You know, it's always easy to point a finger at something that you don't like, and it's not my fault or responsibility. Therefore,
Right.
you're the nemesis. And then I will never forget a couple things. I was on a talk show, and the host was very gracious. And the host said, you know, you have these accolades, or you have a nice life, an adventurous life, or you have books that are doing well. Your parents must be so proud of you. And it was just a slip. And the audience was gasping, like, oh my goodness, what a
Maybe they didn't read the book.
Well, yeah, you kind of would figure, that's not in the crib notes. But and I kind of said, yes, my foster parents are
Yeah,
very
good for you. Good catch. Good
Oh, yeah,
catch.
and I did it nice. I didn't want you never out host the host. I learned that quickly. But if you look at my dynamic, being
Mhm.
isolated in the basement on and off for 8 years, not allowed to speak a
Yeah.
syllable, or swallow pneumonia twice in 24 hours, which still affects me to this second,
Yeah.
or no motor skills, or no social skills, nothing.
Hmm.
And then being allowed into the Air Force, allowed to fly top secret missions, speaking 4 different languages, doing comedy.
Well, and I remember in the book talking about how you were trying to get the attention of these recruiters, and you were polishing somebody's boots or something. I couldn't quite figure that part out, but I got where, you know, there's a math problem comes up and all of a sudden you pop up with the answer. And that sort of, it's like, okay, now they actually, it's the first time they saw you.
Yeah, as a human being, because
Yeah,
again,
I mean, they saw you at that point.
the Air Force was not happy to have a high school dropout who
Yeah.
stutters, constantly hunched over, and they thought I must have committed felonies to be placed in foster care. It was a prejudice back in
Right.
that day. But the story that I want to relate is, I was a year and a half into foster care. I'm about 13, starting to figure out, you know, to speak the language, to be a part of the, you know, the normal society. And my foster mother is on one side, my social worker, Miss Gold, is on the other, and this gentleman who looked exactly like Doc Brown from Back to the Future with the wispy hair and,
Yeah.
you know, cadence. And he basically said, there is no chance in hell that this child, this entity, is going to make it. It's going to be death or prison. And I'm the doctor. I know these things.
Yeah.
And I felt inside, one, you don't see me, you don't know me. Because before that, as you read in the book, I had that Superman effect.
Yeah.
On the inside, I'm powerful. I
Sure.
can solve problems. I'm a very good person. And I remember after the doctor stated this, one of the 2 ladies stated, and it really resonated perfectly. Again, those tumblers. She said, if you can survive all that you did, David, without any help or training, David, then I expect greatness from you.
Hmm.
And within the thread of Return to the River, there's stories within stories about unexpected things that happen.
Sure.
But if you can survive this, that gives you a foothold for this, and this, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe the book as a kind of, you know, a story of the serendipitous thread that runs through. That's what the book is. If I was doing the cover pitch, I'd say that's what I would write, because that's what it is, serendipity, but also with some God in the mix there. So it's not just luck. It's
There's lots, and what I like about this book too, it's kind of like my version of Casablanca. It's a very haunting love story about things that you give up for a higher purpose and the cost of being of service.
Yeah.
In a sense. And I must say this too, on the spiritual side, and I do say this on stage quite a bit, is I believe, excuse me, I do believe I am the most blessed person that I've ever known. I've been given all these adventures. I've had all these opportunities. I've had beautiful loves, and I still have a few more good summers left to either relax, spool down, or just, you know, do something, do nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why there was a tribute. Everybody knows I'm a big James Bond fan, and there's little hints in the books about certain movies and so forth. And there was a movie, a James Bond movie, and basically the character drops his gun, his badge, and walks off the bridge. And that's a hell of a metaphor. And that's why I was trying to say, okay, I've done for God and country. I've saved the world as best as I can. Give it to the kids. Don't cling on. and find something else to do. And that's what I think, again, the book came in. It usually takes me about a good 2 years to write. I think I had a rough draft in 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, I totally believe it. There have been a few books of mine that have been that way too, and they've tended to be ones that have done well and touched people, because there's not that sort of a layer of too much over analysis.
And there's a rawness involved and an honesty, because I look at my character and I've made more mistakes than I can own up to. But at the end of the day, I try to work the program, let's say 1 day at a time, 1 box at a time. I run my program. I try to do 3 nice deeds a day, make people laugh. Or if I can just give you something that I think you can use to put you on path, I have no problem of doing that. Because again, I thought I was going to die that weekend, right before hours before I was rescued. I was almost homeless as a kid, and the Air Force took me in. I've had so many life and death situations that at the last second, what I call the Mission Impossible effect, dun, 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 something came up. Something came up.
Yeah, no, that's it. And that serendipitous thread runs through.
And Frank, I want to read this, if I may, because I think you would appreciate this, because you're
please.
Very, spiritual person, a very deep person. And this was supposed to be in the book, and somehow it didn't make it. And big mistake, huge. We're fixing it. I love this quote. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. And that's a Bay Area writer, Jack London. Another quote, and you should figure this one out. Live a grand adventure, so to tell a great story. North Sonoma Coast, Fire Captain, 4412.
Yeah.
I love that quote with Jack London. That just says it all. Because if anything, when I did the subtitle pandemic, it was a situation within a situation that was so overwhelming, we couldn't control it. We couldn't deny it. We have to accept this is the new world. So what I always try to do is say, okay, when you're overwhelmed from this, and this, 1 step at a time, do what you can, move forward, and you'll get out of this. What did Churchill say? When you're going through hell, you just keep going. Brad Pitt, World War Z, he plays the doctor, and he said, it's a beautiful line. Life is about movement. We've got to keep moving. So and we talked about the political aspect of life, the abuse aspect, or being bullied in a sense, or just trying to attempt to do something. In firefighting, I've studied aeronautics, psychology. I have a degree in criminal justice. I mean, I study a lot. Firefighting is so fluid. Every call is different. Every fire is different. Every situation is so different. And 90% of the time, let's try this. Oh my God, that would advance you to do something else that might lead to something else. And yes, as I said in the book, you falter, you fall, but you give yourself the strength, you give yourself the permission to have the courage and rise up again. And that's why I've been so damn lucky.
I want to follow up on something that I was wondering about as I read the book. And that was just, we all have something to prove. We all come from somewhere. One of the things I like about Return to the River is that, you don't make any secret of your own psychological path to who you are. In other words, you're not pretending that everything you're saying is objectively true, capital T. It's like, hey, this is how I see it. Look where I came from. How did you think this was going to work out? Well, similarly, and I have a question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I've sort of forgotten this is a podcast, and I feel like we're just talking. So forget that other people are going to hear this. But
okay, no one listen to my answer.
Yeah, my question to you is just writer to writer, person to person, old guy to old guy. I am driven in my own life by a journey that began with rejecting certain ways I was brought up and certain things that I once believed I no longer believe in a theological, philosophical, political sense. Okay, so there's a journey there. I used to try to pretend that my conclusions had some objective truth to them, in the sense that, for instance, in describing to someone why I describe myself as an atheist who believes in God, I pray, and then someone will say, well, why do you still pray? And when you don't always believe, and I say, well, that's the way I was raised. If you got a problem with that, in the sense that that's just who I am. I don't have a good reason for all this stuff. You just accept yourself as you are. My question to you is, okay, firefighter, Air Force, secret missions, firefighter as an old guy, continuing on until very recently when you've come up to Russian River to do something a bit different. Do you look back on your life of writing bestsellers and everything you've done? You know, you have not just had a full life. It seems to me that you have filled it. And I don't want to be rude here, but do you think some of that comes from trying to get the ringing out of your ears of some of the bad parts in that, by being so active and so involved in so many things? It's not just who you are, is it also a survival mechanism? And I'm just curious, because I think that,
and Frank, that's a great question. I have to tell you the truth. And I'm going to sideline this a little bit. I'm human like everybody else, and that's why I've exposed what I've done right and what I've done wrong.
right.
That's why I'm not a very big fan of the so-called 1980s, 90s professional motivational speakers
Right.
who know all and do nothing.
Yeah.
And these clowns, I since COVID, I haven't heard anything from these clowns walking someone across the street or helping out their fellow man. So that's one thing. Secondly, everything I've done some of it was planned. Like I wanted to join the Air Force. I wanted a certain job slot, and I just had to work hard for it. I never expected to be a writer. A Child Called It initially was just a thank you letter for my teachers. I'd fall in and I never thought at age 52, okay, I'm going to be a firefighter now. It just happened. It's kind of like falling in love. You know, I didn't plan it. You know, I didn't plan a lot of things in my life, but I've always been able to utilize things to the best of my ability. And part of that is part of the past, because I was always a scrapper. As you read, if my mom didn't feed me, I found a way to feed myself.
Right. Well, and your teacher's talking about seeing you rooting through garbage in the school looking for food, you know.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's basic Maslow's hierarchy theory, you know, survival, food, water, clothing, and so forth. It was never about trying to prove myself or what have you. I think for me, it's like I said, the blessed part, right time, right place. And I just always found a way to burrow my way through. Especially as a firefighter at age 52, I'm competing with kids that are 19, 20, 21. So I had to work harder and faster than they did, because they either had a different skill set or their bodies were in a little bit better shape. So
as you pursued those things, I think, you know, and I'm not projecting, I'm just asking, do you think that as you look back over some of that now, all of which was good, by the way, I'm not questioning the decisions, but I'm just saying, do you think that that also helped you in the sense that that level of activity gave you something to focus on in the, you know, you lived for the day you were in? That's a big point you make in your book. It's the moment we're in that matters. Having carried that out in your own life, do you think that actually was healing in the sense that it took you out of a level of introspection that would have just been paralyzing if you had stayed there?
That, I think part of that is kind of true on a subliminal sense. I just, part of it is, for me, it's like when you're less than zero, you are nothing, you have nothing. Whether it was a compliment like "keep up the good work, son," or a little scrap of food, oh my God, this is such a banquet. So again, you know, trying to find that balance. But I again, just, I have to honestly say, I wish there was a master plan.
Yes, right. It would be nice.
And I can say, okay, I've done this, I'll do that, like a shopping list or a bucket list. But for me, that's why the older I've become, and I work a lot with writers like you do. And for me to say, yeah, I had the #1 book in the world. It was on the New York Times for 6 years. Average stay 3 weeks. It's not being braggadocious. I'm going, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it actually happened.
When I look at my beginnings, in particular foster care, that was very difficult for me, because I worked 40 hours a week in junior high, 60 hours, 80 hours in high school. I mean, there's always in the beginning, again, that Maslow's theory, that desperateness in a sense. And now I'm kind of like, as an older gentleman, I've been working out for 40 years, so I'm slowing down and I'm reaping the benefits of saving money or working on my body or my mind, or I was doing Sudoku right before we went on the air. So I'm always doing little things, but to me, it's joyful, whether it's having a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, or I love to plant my spring flowers. There's
Yeah.
always a joy behind it, or that grand sense of adventure. I mean,
I had a question that came out of the book that I want to make sure I ask you, because this is just personal curiosity. I can't say I understand your mom, but with exposure to your grandmother, I get that, some of that. But I wonder whether in your life's journey, you ever found out enough about your grandmother and what that whole thing was about to kind of have a better understanding of, where your mother came from, in the sense of, that kind of inexplicable cruelty. I wonder whether that ever you chase that down, or whether it's like, okay, been there, done that, I'm done with this. I don't really want to know.
I interviewed, and I don't think I said it in Return to the River, but in one of my books, I was a very young man, still in the Air Force, had a young child, working in psychology and juvenile hall and counseling and so forth. And at one point, I interviewed my mom for over 4 hours. When you interview someone, it's just like—
Wait, go back. I didn't read this in this book.
No, I said that. Yeah.
I know that, but I'm just so fascinated because that's such a huge thing for me. Having
let me explain.
I got to hear this.
Well, I interviewed my mom for 4 hours. When you interview someone, a good interview, you're just talking. They don't even know they're being interviewed. It's 3 to 5, 7 questions that you ask in different ways, whether you're in—
How old was she?
I was 27.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking she must have been in her 60s. I'm thinking early 60s. And then you look at the parallel, and a child called it, or particularly in Return to the River, my mom had a certain grace about her. She was a tomboy, but everything about her was OCD-ish. And that was part of how she was raised. So now I'm seeing my mom as a young man with a young child, and she's living in a dungeon in a sense. There's no light. The smell of urine from the animals and the carpet and the padding, rheumatoid arthritis. She lives in a chair, urinates in a chair. She has 2 or 3 TVs that work, don't work, and she's basically collapsed upon herself. And it was explained to me by other people that my mom was raised in Salt Lake City, Utah in the 1930s. Now, for anybody under the age of 40, your audience, what's the deal? Think about it. The 1930s, women didn't have rights in Salt Lake City. It was men, dogs, and way below that, it was women. My mother was raised, this never happened. We don't talk about sex or politics, medical situations, the church. This is a lock box. That's why the reference Return to the River, my hurt lockers. So she was raised in an era that she was physically and is extremely emotionally abused. And it was one of those things that just happened. She's supposed to marry Mr. Man, swallow it, and things will eventually work out. Because again, I'm a psychological voyeur. I mean, I'm always looking for the cure of cancer in a sense. So that's 2 generations. I had to make a change, and I wanted to make a positive change in my life so I wouldn't become the new Terminator or Darth Vader per se. But no, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that obviously, I mean, I don't want to suggest, but that there's another book there starting with that interview.
No, I got to tell you, Frank,
you're done.
Unless I write a book about comedy, I think I'm done with writing.
Maybe you should talk to some of your Hollywood buddies, because there's certainly a movie there that's starting in Salt Lake in 1930. I mean, that's really an incredible thread.
Well, and what I like, and by a coincidence, supposedly,
yeah,
they're going to make a movie on the first book. It's been a long time coming, and different things are involved and so forth. But I actually think Return to the River would be a standalone good movie in a sense. Of course, Chris Nolan would direct it for us, I'm sure. But and that's I love the line. I love movies, and I love the line from what was that? Tom Hanks, Castaway.
Yes.
You got to have faith, because you never know what the tide's going to bring in the next day.
Yeah.
Or another line is, in the course of a life, one never knows what events may transpire.
Yeah.
The other line that I love, and it's a big line for me personally, is Tom Hanks has come home, and there's a big party for him, and there's food and so much abundance, too much abundance. And his friend goes up to him, he's a little drunk, and says, so what's it like to be back home? What's it like, buddy? You like it? And Tom Hanks is like a child, and he goes, and he says the perfect line. He's nervous and he says, I have ice. My big thing, Frank, is clean sheets.
Yeah.
If I had Oprah money, I'd have clean sheets every single day. But I tried very much. It's called Clean Sheet Friday. Clean up the house a little bit. I spend more money on flowers interior than I do libations. And everybody knows I love a good libation. And I just love the small little things 10, 20 times a day that gives me safety, security, and this makes me happy and makes me beam so I can hopefully be a good person, or hopefully, like you, try to figure something out, use to help people spring forward.
Good place to wrap it up. Hey, Dave, I've enjoyed our talk. Once again, just signing off here. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, talking with Dave Pelzer. Return to the River is out. It's a good read. It's a tough read because, you know, what's so weird about people who suffer terrible things, sometimes reading or hearing about them from someone, you know, has a great impact on them. But the person who went through it, because they've survived it, they can talk about it as an experience that they've gotten through. Whereas to confront it as part of a literary journey, you know, when you're sitting in the comfort of your own home, is tough because the story is heart-wrenching. But then, you know, you say you're not a good writer, but obviously I wouldn't feel that way if that was true, because you certainly got to me in the book.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do and the people that you're helping out. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And if you're watching this on Facebook or somewhere else and you hear it on a podcast, if you like it, please like it, quote unquote, in the online internet sense, and spread the word so we can let people know about Dave's new book. So Dave, thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thank you, sir.